There are times when life gets busy in ways we don't always notice right away. We keep working, we keep showing up, we keep doing what needs to be done. And because we're still moving, we assume we're doing okay. But over the last few weeks, I started noticing that something in me felt different. My patience was shorter, my body felt tighter, and my world had gotten a little smaller. And it wasn't because of just one thing. It felt more like too much heat for too long without enough space to cool down. Eventually, I had to acknowledge that the way I had been moving through my days wasn't doing me much good. And maybe even more importantly, I had to stop pretending that pushing through was the same thing as moving forward. Sometimes finding our way doesn't mean we need to try harder. Sometimes we need enough space to notice what is helping us, what is hurting us, and what we've been trying so hard to carry that we haven't noticed the weight of it anymore. So before we go any further today, I want to begin with something I probably haven't been giving myself enough of lately. A moment to just breathe. So as we typically do, let's take this moment to slow things down. Get comfortable wherever you are. Soften your shoulders and take a breath with me. Take a slow breath in. And gently let it out. Wherever you are, allow yourself to arrive and walk gently into this space with me. Welcome to Find Your Way to Vibe. I'm Amber, and I'm really glad you're walking with me today. One of the interesting things about creating this podcast is that I spend a lot of time talking about the things that help us find our way back to ourselves. Paying attention, slowing down, listening to what our bodies are telling us, and making room for the things that fill us back up. And I believe in all of it. But believing something and consistently living it are two very different things. I don't think any of us reaches a point where we suddenly have ourselves completely figured out. I certainly haven't. Life shifts. Our responsibilities change. We get busy. We get focused on something we care about. And sometimes we're just trying to keep up with everything that's in front of us. And without necessarily realizing it, the things that usually keep us grounded can start getting pushed farther and farther to the side. I think that's why I have always thought of Way2Vyb as a practice rather than a destination. Finding your way doesn't mean you never wander. It doesn't mean stress never gets the better of you or that you always recognize what you need the moment you need it. Sometimes the wandering is exactly what shows you how far you've moved away from what you know. And over the past few weeks, I got a pretty good reminder of that. Because when I finally slowed down enough to look at what had been happening, I realized I hadn't necessarily lost my way. I had just stopped paying attention to some of the things that had helped me find it in the first place. And that's probably the best place for us to start walking today. I think the first thing I had to admit to myself was that none of this was happening because I didn't know what I needed. I knew. And that might have been the hardest part. I know it helps me when I start feeling overwhelmed. I know that I need to get outside. I know that I need to move my body and that I need quiet, but not necessarily the kind of quiet that comes from sitting inside staring at the same four walls. I need the kind that comes from walking underneath the trees or hearing the ocean waves crash against the shore or getting far enough away from everything that I can hear myself again. I know those things about myself. I've spent years learning them, and yet, for weeks, I wasn't doing very many of them. I was focused on working, and then I was working some more. I was trying to keep up with all of my responsibilities and keep moving toward the things I want for my life. Keep this podcast going. Keep building Way2Vyb. Keep showing up for the people around me. There was always something else that needed my attention. And somewhere inside of all of that, I stopped giving much attention to myself, which is a strange thing to realize when so much of what I've been building is centered around exactly that. I was spending all of this time working on Find Your Way2Vyb while not really finding mine. And I don't mean that in some dramatic way. I hadn't suddenly forgotten everything I've learned. I hadn't lost myself. I had just slowly stopped practicing the things that help me stay connected to myself. I think that can happen easier than we realize. Sometimes we know what is good for us and still don't make room for it. We tell ourselves we'll go for the walk tomorrow. We'll get outside this weekend. We'll slow down when this project is finished. Or we'll rest when we get caught up. Except somehow there's always another thing waiting behind the thing we just finished. And I started noticing that I was spending more and more time indoors, more time at my computer, more time thinking about what needed to get done, and less time doing the things that actually help me feel like myself. The things that usually give me some room to breathe were slowly being replaced by the things that were creating the need for that room in the first place. And my body knew it before I was ready to acknowledge it. I was more tense, more reactive, less patient. Things that normally wouldn't bother me were bothering me. I could feel that I wasn't responding to life the way I usually do. And for a while, I kept trying to push through it, because that's another thing I know how to do. I can push through almost anything. But just because I can, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for me. There is a difference between perseverance and ignoring yourself. And I think I had crossed that line without realizing it. I had become so focused on not letting other people down and so focused on not letting myself down when it came to the things I was trying to accomplish that I wasn't paying attention to what it was costing me to keep everything moving. And I didn't need another book. I didn't need someone to tell me how to manage stress. And I didn't need another philosophy. I already had one. I just wasn't living it. And maybe that is part of finding our way too. It isn't always about discovering something new. Sometimes we realize we've wandered away from something we already knew. And by the time I finally recognized how far I had wandered from some of those practices, the pressure I had been carrying had already started making itself known. The image that kept coming to me this week was a pot of boiling water, because that is honestly what I felt like. The heat had been building for a while. There was work, responsibilities, relationships, things I was trying to accomplish, and just the everyday stuff that most of us carry in one form or another. But I was adding plenty of my own heat too. I had expectations for myself, things I wanted to finish, goals I didn't want to give up on, and people I didn't want to disappoint. None of it felt impossible on its own, but I wasn't turning the heat down anywhere. I was mostly just carrying it. And I think there is a point where carrying stress starts to look a lot like functioning. You're still getting things done, still showing up, still moving forward. So, from the outside, everything probably looks fine. Sometimes, even from the inside, we convince ourselves that it is, until something happens that shows us otherwise. I had one of those moments recently. I responded to something in a way that didn't feel very much like the person I have worked hard to become. I don't need to go into details of it because the details aren't really the important part. What mattered was that I recognized myself in that response. An older version of myself, a more reactive version. And I didn't like seeing her again. Stress may help me understand why I reacted the way I did, but it doesn't mean I get to ignore the fact that I did. That moment told me the pressure had gotten higher than I was admitting. Because when I become overwhelmed, one of my natural responses is to get quiet. I stop wanting to talk about everything. I don't want to keep repeating what is bothering me or unloading everything I'm carrying into someone else's space. I usually want to go inward. I need time to sort through what I'm thinking and feeling before I know what I want to do with it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I have actually had to learn that I'm allowed to need quiet. I don't have to maintain a certain energy simply because other people are more comfortable when I'm cheerful or talkative. Someone else's discomfort with my silence doesn't automatically mean my silence is wrong. If I can say, I'm having a day, I just need some space, then I think I'm allowed to take that space. What someone else does with it after, that belongs to them. But there was another part of this that I needed to look at too. Because needing space and completely withholding communication are not always the same thing. Sometimes I think I have been so focused on not dumping my stress onto other people that I've gone too far in the opposite direction. I hold everything in. I process everything alone. And I stop talking about what is going on. And somewhere along the way, what I thought was me being mindful can become me simply trying to contain everything myself. That doesn't really help anyone either, especially me. Because containing stress is not the same thing as releasing it. I can put a lid on the pot and I can hold it there. I can tell myself I'm managing everything just fine. But if the heat underneath never changes, the pressure is still building. And eventually, it finds somewhere to go. And maybe that looks like impatience or becoming more reactive. Maybe things that normally wouldn't bother us suddenly bother us. Or maybe we find ourselves responding in ways that don't feel like us anymore. And I think that was the message for me. I wasn't managing the stress, I was containing it. And there is a difference. Managing it means actually giving some of that pressure somewhere to go. Whether that looks like moving, communicating, resting, or creating enough space to hear what I need. And containing it is just holding the lid down and hoping nothing spills over. And mine was getting pretty close. And I didn't need to become better at holding the lid down. What I needed to do is turn down the heat. And the funny thing is, I already knew where to start. Eventually, I knew I needed to stop pushing and start making room for the things I had been neglecting. So I have been making it a point to get outside. A couple of weekends ago, I found myself back among the green trees of Washington, which I so greatly needed. I got to go hiking barefoot and sit with some of my favorite trees while also taking the opportunity to press my forehead against them for a while and just let myself be there. No agenda, nothing I needed to accomplish, just me standing in the middle of something that has always made sense to me. And I could feel the difference. Not because everything waiting for me had disappeared, because it hadn't, but something in me softened. I think sometimes I forget how physical stress can become. It isn't only thoughts running through my head. I feel it in my shoulders, in my breathing, and how quickly I react to things, and how much space there seems to be between something happening and the way I respond to it. And when I spend too much time disconnected from the things that ground me, I can feel that space getting smaller. Getting outside starts giving some of it back. So I have increased my time outside again, and this week I had the opportunity to go on a few walks with my son, and I went hiking with a friend. And we've also, for my daughter's birthday, went to the beach for the sunset and spent some time cleaning up the shoreline together like she loves to do every year on her birthday. There was something about those moments that reminded me that filling myself back up doesn't have to mean some huge retreat from life. Sometimes it is just returning to the parts of life that make me feel connected to it. And I needed that more than I realized. I think I had become so accustomed to operating under stress that I forgot what the contrast felt like until I felt it again. my body tells me a lot. It tells me when I need to move, when I need quiet, when I need space, and when I have been asking too much of myself for too long. The problem isn't usually that I don't know. The problem is that sometimes I get stubborn enough to ignore what I know. I tell myself I don't have time, or that I need to finish one more thing first, or that I can push through for another week. And technically, I probably can. But I can handle it isn't always a good enough reason to keep handling it. Because I know what happens when I don't give anything back to myself. I become less patient, less grounded, less like the version of myself I actually enjoy being. And that doesn't serve the goals I'm working so hard toward anyway. Taking care of myself isn't time away from the life I'm trying to build. It is part of how I become capable of building it. And when I looked back at the last couple of weeks, I realized just how different I felt after I started making room for those things again. Not fixed, not completely stress-free, just more like myself, more grounded, more able to see clearly, especially after the last few days. And sometimes that clarity brings an uncomfortable realization with it. Because once I stopped operating completely from a place of stress, I could see that some things in my life are asking me to recover from them over and over again. Some things are asking me to change. That distinction matters to me because I can walk, I can hike, I can sit underneath a tree or meditate. I can go barefoot and put my feet on the earth and do all of these things that I know help regulate me. And I absolutely need to keep doing them. But I don't want to use the things that bring me peace as a way to continually make myself more tolerant of a life that is asking too much from me. That doesn't feel like balance either. There is a difference between taking care of myself through a stressful season and continually replenishing myself just enough to return to something that keeps emptying me. And I think I have been wrestling with that difference. There are responsibilities in my life right now that I can't just walk away from. There are commitments I have made, and there are changes that are going to take some time. I understand that. But understanding that something can't change overnight doesn't mean I have to stop moving toward changing it. I think for a while I have been trying so hard to keep everything going that I haven't really looked at whether everything I am keeping going still belongs in the life I'm trying to create. And that gets into something else I have been thinking about. Loyalty. Loyalty has always meant a lot to me. I want to show up and do what I said I would do. I work hard and I don't like walking away from things that matter to me. But I'm starting to understand that loyalty can only be about what I owe to everyone and everything around me. Some of that loyalty has to belong to me too. to the life I want, to the way I want to feel inside of that life, and to the person I want to be while I'm building it. Because I don't want to accomplish the things I'm working toward by becoming completely depleted in the process. And I definitely don't want to spend all of my energy building a life I hope to live someday while barely experiencing the one I'm living right now. I know I need more nature in my life. I know I need more space. And I know the pace and environment I have been living in doesn't feel sustainable to me anymore. There are parts of the rat race that I am simply tired of running. And that realization doesn't mean I need to blow my entire life apart tomorrow. Although my intrusive thoughts are very loud and they continually tell me to do it. But I will refrain from listening to those thoughts. But it simply means that I need to start listening to what I already know, to begin making decisions that point me towards something different. Maybe that is where balance comes in for me right now. Not standing perfectly still in the middle of everything and somehow keeping all of it evenly distributed. Maybe balance is movement. Adjusting when something becomes too heavy. Putting something down when I no longer need to carry it. Giving more energy to what gives something back. And recognizing when resistance is actually making the walk harder than it needs to be. I've spent a lot of energy lately pushing through stress, pushing through exhaustion, pushing myself toward goals, and pushing against circumstances I don't particularly want to be in. And there is a place for determination. I know that. But I also think there is a point where determination becomes resistance, where instead of moving with my life, I'm trying to wrestle it into submission. Maybe what I need next isn't more force. Instead, I want to pay attention to where there is flow, to what gives me energy instead of constantly taking it, to what makes me feel expansive instead of contracted, to the places, people, practices, and possibilities that make something inside of me say, yeah, more of this, and then start walking that way. I don't have to know every step yet. I don't have to have the whole transition figured out. But I do need to stop pretending I don't know the direction. Because I do. And maybe forward movement starts there. Not with having the entire map, just with being willing to honor what I already know is doing me good. And being honest about what isn't. And that brings me to my trail of gratitude this week. Strangely enough, I found myself feeling grateful for some of the resistance, for the uncomfortable moments, and for the things that didn't go quite as smoothly as I would have liked. Not because I enjoyed any of it, and not because I think every difficult experience needs to be turned into something beautiful in order to have value, but because sometimes resistance has a way of showing us where we've been pushing too hard. This week brought some things to the surface that I probably would have continued carrying if everything had stayed comfortable. There were conversations that needed to happen, things I needed to say, and things I needed to hear. And some of the pressure I had been holding onto finally had somewhere to go. I don't think I realized how badly I needed that until afterward. There is something interesting about relief. Sometimes you don't recognize how tightly you've been holding something until you finally put a little bit of it down. And that is what this week felt like. Not everything was solved. There are still things I need to work through and decisions I need to make. But there is a little more room now, a little more clarity, and maybe a little less resistance to what I already know. So this week, I am grateful for the moments that made me uncomfortable enough to pay attention, for the conversations that released some of the pressure, for the reminder that I don't have to carry everything silently just because I am capable of carrying it. And for the realization that sometimes the thing disrupting our peace isn't there to ruin it. Sometimes it is showing us where peace has already been missing. I wouldn't necessarily choose every part of this week again, but I can still be grateful for what it revealed. Because sometimes the trail gets rough enough that we finally stop staring at our feet and look up to see where we're actually going. And I think that's where I'm going to leave us today, because I don't think finding our way means we always get it right. We get busy. We push too hard. Sometimes we stay in something longer than we probably should. And we can become so focused on where we're trying to go that we stop noticing what the journey there is doing to us. Eventually, something gets our attention. For me, the last few weeks have been a reminder that I can't just know what grounds me. I have to participate in it. I have to make room for it. I have to pay attention when my body starts telling me that something isn't working, instead of waiting until it has to speak up. And I also have to be willing to recognize when taking better care of myself isn't the only answer. Sometimes taking care of ourselves gives us enough clarity to see what needs to change around us too. I don't have all those changes figured out yet, but I feel like I can see the trail a little better than I could a few weeks ago. And for right now, that's enough. I don't need to run toward the next version of my life. I just need to keep making choices that move me in its direction. Maybe that's part of living what we know. Paying attention to what brings us back to ourselves, being honest about what keeps pulling us away, and then choosing accordingly as often as we can. So, wherever you are on your own trail this week, I hope you make a little room for whatever helps you come back to yourself. It doesn't have to be big. Maybe you just need some movement, or some quiet time, or even a conversation. Maybe you just need to step outside for a while and remember that there is a whole world beyond whatever has been taking up all the space in your head. Whatever it is, I hope you let yourself have some of it. And I'll be doing the same. As always, thank you for walking with me today. Until next time, walk slowly, breathe deeply, and may you always find your way to vibe.